Welcome everyone to iPad. Yes, I can. To Effective iPad Integration in the College course. Those of you joining us from sunny San Diego, I'm sure that you're having a blast. If not, we're going to try to make this as fun as possible so that you can get outside and enjoy the Southern California weather. Today's presentation it's going to be a little bit informative. Obviously, this is not a hands-on workshop, but I just want everyone to sort of get an idea of if you're planning of implementing the iPad in a college course. It could be a face-to-face, blended, online, that there are going to be a few items that are pretty much general to any instruction or any implementation of technology in the course. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. My agenda for today, the tentative agenda for today, is an introduction. I would cover some technicalities with regards to instructional design and developing courses when you are integrating technology, practical observations that I want everyone to have in mind. We'll talk a little bit about the iPad and some of the options that you have with the iPad, some of the applications that you may have or you may want to use, some ideas that you may want to integrate while using the iPad, and then we'll finish with a short discussion. So I think introductions are in order, and if you're wondering who I am, my name is Mauricio, and I work for Academic Technology and Innovation with California State University, San Bernardino. I've been working for Academic Technology and Innovation for about 10 years. We used to be called Online and Distributed Learning. We recently changed our names to ATI. I've been doing a lot of instructional design, both for just simply using technology integration in a face-to-face, to blended, to fully online, and I am currently working with the department or the Department of Education or the College of Education here on campus, developing and implementing a fully online program for the teacher leadership. I'm originally from South America, so yes, I love the weather here, although it gets a little bit too hot for me. I do a lot of different distance learning related projects. I work with the CSU Chancellor's Office on quality matters and making sure that online courses or blended courses meet the criteria for quality matters. I also do a little of student opinions of teaching effectiveness evaluations, that we do here at the OTs, and other stuff that you're probably just not wanting to know about. Okay, every presentation I always start with a disclaimer. Okay, and the disclaimer is that this is not about you, and this is about me. Unless you want to make it about you, then that is okay by me. And I hope that you know that individual results may vary. What I mean by this is everybody has a different approach to online, blended, or face-to-face instruction. I'm an instructional designer, and although I do teach face-to-face classes, I understand that each of us has a particular way of approaching our instruction. Therefore, I want you to know that what I'm presenting here today is what I have discovered has worked, both in my own classes as well as when I work with faculty on helping them develop their classes. Nothing that I said here is absolute, but if there's anything that you hear that you like, please go ahead and use it and implement it in your own. If you just joined us and you're wondering, well, am I going to be able to benefit from this webinar? And if you answer yes to any of the following questions, then yes, this is definitely for you. The questions are, or not the questions, the statements. If you have taught any course before, if you're an instructor, part-time faculty, adjunct, lecturer, tenured, if you've taught before, then this is for you. If you're thinking of teaching hybrid online, or you've been told that you're going to be teaching a hybrid or online course, then this is for you. If you're just curious about distance education. If you think you know everything about teaching or you do not have anything else to do right now, well, this is for you. Because the presentation is about the iPad. Well, let me ask you, when you first hear the word iPad and they say, well, what is it? Some of the words that come to mind as well as a thing, is a device, a tablet. It's very expensive. You can use it as a laptop. Some people think it's a computer. Of course, as a camera. It's very fragile. I've owned 3 iPads, and somehow I've managed to crack or scratch every single one of them. So trust me, I know how fragile it is, etc. So they see it as an item, as a physical object. When you ask someone, well, what does the iPad do? Some of the answers you get are, it reads books, you can take pictures with it, you can play music or videos, you can sketch, you can FaceTime with others, chat, text, you can make phone calls, etc. And I'm not saying that any of these are wrong, but I would like you to consider something else. If we see the iPad as simply an item, then technically speaking, the chalkboard, any other sort of surface in which you can write on or sketch could be considered an iPad. So why don't we start changing our observation or our mentality about the iPad as a device and think about it in a different way. And I like to propose about thinking of the iPad as providing possibilities, being a vehicle for information, being a catalyst to learning, sparking knowledge and communication, engagement, innovation. Okay, so once we start seeing it as not as a simple device, then all of a sudden it changes the approach of how we use the iPad or how we want to integrate the iPad into the course. Now, have you taken some time to ask yourself these questions? And I'm assuming that those of you watching this video recording have taught or are thinking about teaching. So let's go through this and let's make sure that you have asked yourself these questions. You can take a piece of paper and just do it on your own, it's fine. But do you know your students? Do you know your audience? Would you take this class if you were the student in this class? Have you considered if students have access to the necessary information to start the course? Is the information clear and concise? Everything that you're going to provide your students, would they be able to understand it? Will they have questions about navigation, etc.? Are the course objectives laid out clearly in your syllabus? Are the course outcomes explained? Are you using assessments? And if you are the assessments completed? Meaning, are you still thinking about what you may do or might do? Or do you know pretty much how you're going to be assessing your students' learning? How about if, have you considered your course matching the syllabus structure? If a student looks at your syllabus and then looks at your course, does it make sense? Does it follow the same structure? Have you identified any potential issues with the course design? Maybe videos that may not play, maybe articles that are linked to the library database that would only be accessible through the university website. Did you design your course on a PC or a desktop Mac computer, and then you realize that students may be using mobile devices? So those are some of the questions, the sub-questions under potential issues. And lastly is, do you have a backup in case of technology failure? Now, you will probably know by now that if you're going to be using technology at any point, regardless of what technology it is, even a light bulb is technology, the light bulb can burn out. Have you considered a backup plan in case of technology failure? If you're telling your students to take your course and to take an exam on a particular day at a particular time, do you have a backup plan for that? Not just simply on the iPad, but any other option. So those are just practical observations that I like everyone to consider when developing or thinking about the development of their course. And as you notice, this is way before we start talking about the iPad. So when talking about the students and thinking about students using the iPad as a device for your course, we talk a lot, or we have to consider, at least for my university or the Cal State system, we have to consider about equity and equality, meaning if you're going to provide options for students, are all the students able to meet those requirements? If at the beginning of the course in your syllabus, on your first meeting and introduction video, you tell the students that they will need to create a video, PSR video, for example, or PSA video, or an introduction video discussion, etc. Would you know if every student is able and capable of using the technology necessary for developing those videos? So this is a funny cartoon that I've seen for a while now. And as you can see, we think of first selection, meaning that everyone will have a chance to take the same exam or do the same activity, etc. However, when we think about the different students that we have in our classes, the different options that they have or access to technology may differ. And that is a big important point that I want you to take into consideration when you want to think about implementing or using the iPad in your course. Now, nowadays we talk about digital technology, and we're thinking, or at least we believe, because we see so many smartphones and tablets and laptops, we assume that everybody has them, that in a college course, in your course, out of 50 students, 49 of them are going to have some sort of technology. So this is a latest survey results that you can find in infographics.com. You simply type digital technology or students' use of technology in the classroom, and then you get many infographics. And when asked, what are students using their devices for in the classroom / in their class? 64% on educational websites, 50% of them independent research. They're doing group activities, about 48%. It's funny, they have motivation. I duplicated, I'm sorry about that. They have cloud storage, photos and videos. Now, if you were to take a look at these numbers, how would you be able to bring in the iPad, your lesson plan or your activities, to have your students, in this case, visit educational websites while they're doing? It's your lesson able to be displayed properly in your iPad when you're asking your students to go to particular websites? Are you going to be providing students with independent research activities in which they're going to be able to complete their assignments on their iPad, etc.? When looking at the type of students that we get into college and initiatives that started in the K-12, by the way, the What Are the Kids Using came out of a study which was part of the ACOT project, which is the Apple project, which is to bring computers to every student. And I've been following the trends, and it looks as though 27% are tablets. You see that the students are still using about 70% of laptops. 66% of the students are using desktops. That becomes very apparent when you go to any of our labs, for example, at the university, and you see that they're still filled with desktops. But then you look at tablets and smartphones, and this to me tells me something. Even though we're talking about millions of cells of the item of the iPad, skyrocketing, smartphones still outweigh tablets when it comes to using the devices for class. On the right-hand side, you see that 1.5 million iPads are used in the classroom, and of course they sell the idea that there are over 20,000 educational applications and 50,000 free lectures and videos. But let me tell you that with the research that I have done, this is still very limited as to what you can do and what you wish to do. So these are just numbers, not to discourage you or encourage you. These are just simply numbers to support the idea that even before we bring in technology into our classrooms or implement technology into our classrooms, that we have to consider who our users are and who our students are. Okay. With regards to the use of the iPad and your particular students, have you taken a moment to consider, your learners? Is this the course that you teach? Is this a course that you teach because of, is a technical course? Is it a course that is a lab-based course? Is it a general education course, foreign language course, etc.? I always like to ask the faculty that I work with, do you know your learners? Do you know who you're going to be teaching? Because I believe that if you know your students, you will know how they learn. And if you know how they learn, you will know how to instruct. So a good pondering question would be, how would you apply this to the development of your course content with regards to where does the iPad come in? I was going to say something else, but I think I'll leave that for later. So, why use the iPad? Okay, so let me ask you a question. And of course, I cannot go 10 seconds here in silence, but while I ask the question, I want you to think about this. Does the iPad successfully and effectively accomplish a task that otherwise would be impossible to accomplish with another technology? For example, paper, a paper book, having students work in groups, a chalkboard, perhaps. The reason why I ask this question is we've looked at developing the course and bringing in the iPad, and it looks great. We have supported faculty who say, let's bring it in. You've had a dean or a principal who buys all of these iPads, gives them to you, and says, now you have the iPad, go ahead and use it and teach it. But if the iPad does not successfully and effectively accomplish a task that otherwise you would be able to do with another technology, then ask yourself the question, why use the iPad? If by this point you still want to consider using the iPad and you have the iPad, you have the infrastructure, you've answered yes pretty much to everything that I've asked so far, we have now, let's move forward with, okay, we have the iPad, let's use it. Ask yourself the question, the purpose. Is this just a cool toy? Is this going to save you time? Do you have goals? What are you going to accomplish with the iPad that you couldn't accomplish without the iPad? Objectives. Do you have general, individual, course, topic, assignments, objectives that can be accomplished through the use of the iPad, or could they be done otherwise? Outcome assessments are very, very important, especially for me. And would using the iPad, or would the students use the iPad, or activities on the iPad, or feedback on the iPad, do they really assist you on assessing learning outcomes? Again, these are questions for you to ponder, and I wish we had a chat. That way you could tell me what you think. But you tell me, okay, Mauricio, I have an iPad, now what? I want you to have the 6 things in mind. The first one is, if I'm going to be using the iPad in my class, am I able to use applications? Of course, everything runs in apps in the app. That would help me with my course objectives. What about content delivery? Is this going to be something that I can develop, let's say, a video or any sort of course content on the iPad and deliver it on the iPad? If it's a face-to-face class, would I be able to bring in the iPad into the classroom and teach the class solely by using the iPad. If I'm going to just simply develop learning modules using the iPad, would my students be able to see them if they didn't have an iPad? What about communication? Am I going to use the applications that are for communication, Skype, WhatsApp, any other sort of communication tools, apps for your students? What about interaction? This is important both in online engagement, distance learning engagement, or student engagement in the classroom. Are you going to be able to interact with your students if you're using the iPad? Assessment. How are you assessing your students? And if you are assessing your students, are you doing it through the iPad? And finally, time management. And by time management, I mean, are you going to be able to use your iPad to save you time when doing things, or do you anticipate that it's actually going to create more work, increase your workload, and by default increase the amount of time that it takes you to complete an assignment or to prepare for class? If those are some of the issues that you have, then perhaps an iPad, it's not appropriate for you or in your course. Now, these are what I currently have on one of my iPads that everybody has, the Dropbox, the Evernotes, the Show-me's, and Edu-Creations. But there are many, many more, and I always recommend faculty to try all of the free versions of these programs. There are many websites. Macworld.com has an incredible list of applications where they have rated them for education, etc., that I would encourage you to go and visit. But think about what you can do and cannot do, and how you can integrate those applications into one seemingly smooth either lecture, content, video, etc. Now, when it comes to the students, are all the students going to be using the same applications as you have? I spoke earlier a little bit about interaction and integration, and that has to do with if you're doing something with your iPad, do students need to have an iPad to be able to participate with what you're doing? On the previous slide, you have applications like Show Me. So you have Show Me, and then you have Edu-Creation or even ThinkSpace. What's great about these applications is the fact that you can create videos and you can share them via the web with a link. So students can actually see them online or on a laptop. They're not flash-based, which means that they can also see them on a flash-based or a non-flash-based enabled device. But those are the sort of things that I want you to consider in the sense of if you're going to be creating, for example, something on Sketch, which is putting images together, for example, but it only works on Sketch. Otherwise, you would have to transfer from Sketch to Evernote, and then from Evernote, you will have to open it in a different program to be able to see it. That wouldn't be a good way or a good use of the iPad application. So in the topic of having the iPad, a possible way that I recommend faculty to implement or to bring in the iPad into the course is, how do you structure your lesson? If you're used to teaching on a face-to-face, you sort of have a lesson plan of what you need to do. But with an iPad, you can make it a self-sustained or self-contained lesson in which students would navigate from beginning to end without necessarily having to interact with you or to go different places. Something that has worked, or a structure that has worked in the past for developing fully self-sustained lessons are introduction to the topic. You can do this on a text format, on a Word document, or anything that is, any application that you're using that has text. And you can also have a short introduction video to the topic that includes sort of a to-do list and expectations for the students. Assessment of knowledge usually is, you can use an application to have like a pre-test of what students need to know or what you want students to know that before the lesson happens. You can then move on to media, either an audio or a video. You can bring in a CAN video, an iTunes U video, a YouTube video, anywhere where you can find an educational video that pertains to the lesson. You can then follow that up with a lecture or a mini lecture. You can create your own lecture using something like SoftChalk, which is a software that you can use to create learning modules. You can do that by, you can create a lecture by using Evernote or any other sort of note-taking applications. You can also go to TED Talks, TEDx, or Khan Academy and bring in a topic and a discussion that students have had. You can then use a personalized application such as EduCreations or Show Me, in which you can import an image, a diagram, a table, a chart, or even screen captures of your computer, and then add both animations, annotations, and video to those to create a video that can be self-explanatory to the students. This is very helpful when you are needing to explain complex, say in economics, in business, in law, in medicine, anything that is complex that it usually will take you a full face-to-face lecture time to explain to students. You can do that in about 5-10 minutes by creating a personalized lecture that serves both as a supporting lecture or as a backup lecture for students that need further information. Then having a hands-on activity, it could just be a quick quiz, an exam. It could be a pop-up exam. It could be a website that you can direct your students to go to on the iPad to complete a particular assessment. Then you would have an assessment evaluation. In this one you can do, you can even create your own quizzes by using applications such as Pop Quiz or Quiz Potatoes. Then you can have your discussions and a follow-up. Now follow-up, it's a little bit tricky when it comes to teaching on an online or distance learning setup. If you're going to be using the iPad, I recommend that you, or the iPad alongside a learning management system, I will recommend that you consider having as a follow-up either a post-test with some feedback from students to provide to you, or a discussion forum in which students would be able to provide some of their thoughts or insights, or even ask some questions that they may have throughout the lesson. But most importantly, a follow-up should be something where students will provide you, the instructor, feedback on whether or not the structure of the lesson, the content of the lesson, the activities, etc., were effective in engaging the students and providing an environment in which active learning occurs. In online and distance learning courses, we often forget that we don't have direct feedback from students. And if you are going to engage your students by doing media, assessments, lectures, hands-on activities, etc. on a device, we are assuming that if they have access to the device, that if they're able to go through the steps of the lectures and the different lesson plans, that therefore they're learning. And we forget to ask the students, have you learned? And if you didn't, what hindered your ability to learn? What hindered your ability to participate in class? And this is very, very important, because for the next lesson, you can then begin to modify some of these items so that they make sense for both, your students' learning and for your instruction. And then finally, really it's about having some considerations or reflective considerations about your own instruction. And that is, when we become too dependent on a device, in this case the iPad, we forget that it is still about 35 to 40% of the market price, which means that although we may think that everybody has an iPhone and an iPad, in actuality, not even 50% of the mobile technology that sits out there is implemented, or that people have it. Sorry, let me repeat that again. We have a tendency to think that because we see more iPads and iPhones on our students, we forget that in actuality that doesn't make up, or makes up for, less than 50% of the mobile devices that are out there. And having that in mind, have you asked yourself the question if the lesson can be transferred outside the iPad? When I quickly showed you EduCreation, Show.me, and any other set of applications, what's great about them is that they're not iPad dependent. They were developed for the iPad because of the display, the audio, and the interactivity of it. But you can actually take those lessons out of the iPad and put them, somewhere else. Put them on your learning management system, put them on a website, or students can view them by using the mobile-based applications for those applications and lessons. Now, is the iPad compatible with your LMS? If you know about Moodle and Sakai and Blackboard and etc., when I talk to faculty about assessments or tests, I have to remind them that our LMS, our Blackboard LMS, you have to use the mobile-enabled exam tool so that they can create exams that will be compatible in the iPad. If you do not use the mobile-compatible tool in Blackboard, you will not be able to take the exam in the iPad. This also happens for discussions or journals, or even any SCORN, which is learning packages that you can put together. If you are not considering that either your university, your school, your institution's LMS is not fully supported and compatible with the iPad, you are going to be hindering your instruction and students' learning, because they will not be able to access some of the lessons or items that you create outside the iPad through the LMS. The other questions are, do you offer tech support for addressing possible issues? Meaning, are you familiar with the iPad yourself? If a student is encountering difficulties, will they be able to contact you? Will they be able to email you and say, I'm sorry, professor, but I cannot access the exam that is due tonight? And if you know the iPad, would you be able to then provide the students support on how to address the possible issue? Is your university aware that your students are using iPads? And if they are, can they provide support? What about a reliable network? I've had faculty who come in and they're really excited to teach in a flipped classroom or a blended course in a technology-filled classroom. But then they don't realize that as it stands right now, 25, 30 students connected to the Wi-Fi using their iPads all of a sudden crashes the system or crashes the network. And all of a sudden, here's your video, here are the lessons that you've prepared, and students cannot access them because there's no reliable network. And finally, and I think this is for all instruction, is, do you have a plan B? What if a student's iPad gets stolen, broken, and yet you're expecting the students to complete all of these wonderful activities and hands-on activities and engagement activities, etc., but they're not compatible with a laptop, or the student doesn't have another option by the iPad? how are they going to be able to complete the assessments? How are they going to be able to engage in the class? How are they going to be able to learn if you don't have a plan B? So you were probably thinking, okay, this was not what I had in mind when I wanted to watch implementing the iPad in the classroom. And I'm sorry if it didn't meet your expectations. I just want you to know that looking at implementing the iPad, although it may be wonderful, that there are a lot of other considerations that are directly related to how you design your course. The iPad is just like a laptop or like a desktop or even an audio recording. It's a device that unless you know how to implement it and how it's going to enhance your course and your lessons, then you might as well not consider taking it. Thank you for your time. I think this ends this quick talk. Again, my name is Mauricio. I'm an instructional designer, and I'm providing you with my email in case you have any questions or follow-up observations on this or any of the other talks. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and again, thank you for joining me.